It is 2953 of the Third Age. Erebor has been reclaimed. Sauron has fled from Mirkwood into Mordor to begin his pursuit for the One Ring. And the last meeting of the White Council has tasked Gildor Inglorion with assembling a fellowship to stop Umbarian pirates from assembling ancient artifacts from a Second Age prophecy. Join the players of this Adventures of Middle-earth Dungeons & Dragons campaign as they unravel the mysteries of the prophecy. Welcome to Arda in Part 1 of the Inglorion Bastards trilogy, Search for Tol Arasir.
So welcome to another episode of the Inglorion Bastards campaign. With me tonight, and my first interview where I have a celebrity with me. So we have with us tonight, we have Jacob Rodgers, who's a designer and writer for the Adventures in Middle-earth and One Ring role-playing game over at Cubicle 7. So welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
All right, so my first question is always sort of the first thing that I ask people that I interview, and that's, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with Tolkien and D&D in whatever order you want.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right. Well, it all kind of ties in together. I am a child of the 80s. Grew up in the 80s. So that was the first time that D&D had a really big splash, right? It was, in E.T. and other movies and whatnot. And so it was, fairly well known. Kind of like today. Today's pretty exciting that we're finally back to that kind of environment where there's a vibe to D&D. So I was very familiar with it. But my very, very first purchase was Middle-earth Role-Playing, the box set.
Yeah.
And so I sat down and I went through it and kind of began to understand the rules, gathered up my friends, and decided that I was going to basically use the game to recreate the Fellowship of the Ring. And that failed spectacularly.
I have read this. You had an interview, I think, somewhere else where I read that it failed spectacularly, is what you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can't railroad players. It's a very, very bad idea to say, you have to go here and you have to do this in this particular order, and especially as a very, very young DM. That was just something I didn't have the skills to keep things on track. Mm-hmm. So that was, again, my very first role-playing experience. But after that, got into D&D, a little bit of first edition, a lot of second edition.
Yep.
Played a lot of games of Dragonlance and a little bit of Forgotten Realms, and then we did a whole bunch of homebrew stuff after that. And then a lot of other stuff. We did Shadowrun, but we weren't really happy with the system, so we had kind of our own homebrew system that we used, but we used all the materials. Settings and whatnot, and Twilight 2000.
Did you ever do any Oriental Adventures or Dark Sun or any of those back in the day?
We did some Dark Sun. We didn't do any Oriental Adventures. So my first edition experience is fairly limited. There's one guy who really wanted to run first edition, and he did Dragonlance. But we did a little bit of Dark Sun. We really liked Aquadine.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of fun with that. But a lot of that stuff, again, at that point we were really deep into the homebrew. We had, maps and lore and everything. So we would just kind of grab, stuff out of Aquadine and say, okay, well, let's transplant it into this world. And there's this island in the south and they've got this, that, and the other kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, stole bits by bits. So that was kind of my beginning experience. And then for a while, I've never ever gotten out of the hobby per se, but I spent a lot of time playing less and reading more for a long time. And now, in the last few years, I'm doing the balance has kind of been restored a little bit.
Oh yeah. So you're playing again?
Yeah. I got a couple of different games going on. Primarily Adventures in Middle-earth for the most part, although we have done some One Ring stuff recently.
Well, when we first started playing this was over a year ago, and there were a few materials out because they had just started coming out, and there was very little that I could look at. I couldn't go to YouTube and look at an Adventures in Middle-earth campaign, right? But now when you go there, it's everywhere. So if I could just come back to one of the things you said, you mentioned when you first started DMing and you tried to sort of recreate the Fellowship. One of the things that you had to get them from point A to point B, right? Right, and that's always a struggle. Especially one of the things we found, we did. Obviously this was a kind of a trilogy campaign, but we did a fixed 10 episodes per arc. And yeah, that was one of the things that I ran into as well, is that, I wanted to introduce freedom and choice as much as possible, but in the end, I kind of had to get them from one point to the next. So in some ways, it felt a little rushed, and it was something that I was struggling with, I think, more than the players.
Yeah, it is rough. One thing that I think is really neat about playing in Middle Earth is that if you think about it, and this is like, I know we both have a common friend in Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor.
Yes.
And we probably, the idea of free will is something that really interests me. And the whole idea that basically, as Lore Master, you kind of step into the shoes of Eru a little bit and say, okay, we have to kind of manipulate events so that the player's choices are what matters, but it's also what creates the story. If that makes any sense at all. That basically you kind of like nudge things along so that the adventure is happening because of the player's choices.
Yeah,
and their choices are tying into the greater story.
No, that's a really good point. A point of clarification for our listeners, if they are not as into the lore as we are, Eru, and I mentioned him, Iluvatar, was sort of the if there was a one god that sat over the Valar, he kind of I guess he was there before the Ainulindale, right? So. The other reference was Corey Olsen, who is the Tolkien professor, and yes, he turns out he doesn't actually live that far away from me. He's in a couple of towns over, but yes, he's very knowledgeable, and I've spoken with him, and he's actually agreed to come on the podcast in between sort of Arc 1 and Arc 2, where we're introducing. I mean, he was instrumental for me because he did a series on the Book of Lost Tales. Which talks a lot about the Lonely Isle and Tol Eressëa, and so it's going to be great to have him on the show just to talk to our listeners, and tell them all about it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move on here. So you, what about Tolkien? You mentioned the box set, but in terms of like, I have to ask, what is it between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books and the Silmarillion? What is your favorite?
Ooh, my official answer is that I love The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I think that's my official answer. That is,
that's very politically correct of you.
So, I enjoy everything, and I really enjoy the deep dives that Christopher's been able to do with all of the ancillary material, and we find it very, very useful to have that inside look. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's so nice to have those, those core stories from the Silmarillion that Tolkien had originally wanted to flush out, right? The fall of Gondolin, the Children of Húrin, and Beren and Luthien. All right, so moving. Let's. If you want to talk any more about Tolkien, you're welcome to. But I don't want to neglect what's bringing you on the show, and that's obviously you working for Cubicle 7, which was huge for me. There wasn't a lot of source material when I first started this, but clearly I borrowed some ideas from Wilderland Adventures. And obviously tried to follow the rules as much as possible. There were some. It was follow the 5e system, but there were some unique rules to Adventures in Middle Earth. Some of which, we don't have to get into that, but so feel free to talk about Tolkien, talk about what brought you to Cubicle 7, anything that really sort of comes to mind there.
Sure. As far as Tolkien goes, I had very, very young exposure to it. With the cartoons and whatnot, and then of course, about the same time that I bought the Merc box set, I had already read through the trilogy and whatnot, and read The Hobbit quite a few times. And as a kid, I'd take out the Legos and I'd recreate the Battle of Helm's Deep with Lego and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I was deep in for pretty early on.
Yeah.
Then as I got a little bit older, dived even deeper into things that as they became available with Silmarillion, the History of Middle-earth series and whatnot. As far as Cubicle 7 goes, of course, as a big Tolkien fan, anytime a role-playing game came out, I was always first to get it. I was like, as soon as I heard about the One Ring being in development, I was following the development process, and everything that had to go on there in terms of like getting the game ready for publication. And then when it came out, I got it. Really chewed on it for a while. It's a little bit different of a game. It's a game that I've always told people it's easier if you don't have any other role-playing game experience. Okay. It's almost easier to teach you how to play the One Ring than it is if you have tremendous experience with role-playing games, because there are some times where it's easier if you don't have any base assumptions about how things work.
Got it.
To learn the game. And so I spent a lot of time, looking at it and whatnot, but it was a couple of years before I really got games going on it. And then when I did, I was like, this is, fantastic stuff. And I started doing a lot of fan work on it. And I was pretty prominent on the forums for, what I was doing with that. And then I went to Gen Con one year and got a chance to kind of hang out with everybody. And that's always good to put a face with a name. I stuck around, helped them out, with just physically moving boxes around, packing things up, which
it's amazing. It's amazing how many jobs start from just moving things around.
Right. Yeah. So got a chance to kind of interact with folks on a personal level, and then as opportunities presented itself to do proofreading and other work, and that led into a lot of things where you kind of touched a little bit on this for Adventures in Middle-earth. When Adventures in Middle-earth, when we first started development on it, the folks who were working on it primarily were coming very much from a lot of experience with the One Ring, and a little bit of experience with 5e. And the benefit of 5e is that the natural language allows you to really say, okay, this is really what I'm trying to go for, and this is what we're trying to achieve, to generate the feel of Middle-earth. But as I started doing the proofreading and whatnot, at that point I was like, okay, I see this, but here's a better way to express it in a more 5e consistent fashion. And so that gave me an opportunity to say, okay, well, let's look at converting this stuff, and I can kind of take lead on that because of my familiarity and kind of help standardize things as we go. So
that's a great story. Yeah. So, gosh, it's just blown up. I mean, it seems like there's more and more. Every time I look, there are more and more source material out there for people to use. Right. So you have been a busy guy.
Yeah, I certainly have. And one of the interesting things about my life is I do live in the future. The stuff that we're about to release by the time this. But let's say we know right now that the Lonely Mountain region guide is available for pre-order. So that's something that my part of got wrapped up a while back. Yep. And then of course it goes into layout, and then art takes a little while and whatnot, and then eventually becomes available for pre-order, and then printing and production takes a little while too.
Meanwhile, you're sworn to secrecy for all of these things. Yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit. We actually, fortunately, for the purposes of this interview, we actually did a big kind of announcement a couple weeks ago, where a lot of things that I've been working on finally got physically announced. So I can actually talk a little bit about them now.
That would be great.
Yeah, we have announced that we are good. Lonely Mountain Region Guide is available for pre-order right now. Erebor Adventures is coming very, very hot and fast on its heels. It may or may not be available for pre-order by the time this comes out. But if it's not available for pre-order, it's coming very, very soon. Then we have Rohan Region Guide and Ritter Mark Adventures. Both of those are in process right now. And then we also announced a whole bunch of stuff for the One Ring, including the second edition of the game, because it has been out since 2011. So there's an opportunity to take a look at everything with a fresh set of eyes, streamline some stuff, but still keep a lot of compatibility with all the first edition materials, so everything will be able to be used. But as part of that, we're releasing, core rules, a starter set, Moria. All right, so Moria is going to have, maybe a couple of volumes that are all about lore, and then, maybe one volume that has all of the One Ring rules, and another volume that has all the Adventures in Middle-earth rules, so that whichever your preferred system is, you can say, okay, I'm going to grab this, and then, boom, we are ready for the Long Dark and Moria.
Sure. Well, man, some of that stuff you mentioned I could have really used for this campaign. I mean, we traveled right through there. The Fellowship went over the Misty Mountains in the north, across the Anduin and the Greyland, and into the Withered Heath, and down through Erebor. Well, great. Well, something that we didn't get into too much, but you and I have talked about it, is the Open Gaming License, the OGL. Is there anything that you'd want to talk, mention what that is?
Yeah, sure. So, if depending on how into role-playing games and the history of the industry you're in, the OGL Open Gaming License may or may not sound familiar. It first came out with 3rd edition D&D, basically allowing third-party manufacturers to have a way to use some of the core rules from D&D in their products. And when 3rd edition went away, of course it kind of lived on in Pathfinder, but the 4th edition came along and they had a different license, which was not OGL. And the 5th edition came out and it was extraordinarily popular, and there was no OGL for the first couple of years. And then in February 2016, they announced the OGL. And I think a month later, we announced that we were going to do Middle-earth using the OGL rules. So that was a decision that didn't take a lot of time to make.
Have you found that a lot of people have sort of come to Cubicle 7 through this product line?
As soon as we announced it, it was really amazing, because as soon as we announced that we were doing it, of course, people who would not necessarily ever look at a custom bespoke system were suddenly reading about us and aware of us, and they were buying the materials just to see what we were all about.
Yeah.
So it led to a huge spike in One Ring sales, which we really didn't anticipate. And then, of course, the ubiquity of the 5e system and the great familiarity that folks have with it means that there are lots and lots of people who are getting to see Cubicle 7's vision of Middle-earth in a familiar system these days.
Yeah, and I'm one of the disciples of the 5e system, really. I mean,
that's great.
So down to our final few questions here. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to talk about these 3 specific things, but
Sure.
there were 3 things that I really borrowed from when I was planning the Fellowship and the campaign, and that was the old well and the creature in the well.
Thing.
Yeah,
the thing in the well.
I mean, it's in interviewing some of my players since then. At least 2 of them have said that was one of their favorite moments when.
Yeah.
And I mean, is there anything you want to talk about that, or do you know the inspiration behind it, or sort of how that came to be?
Well, of course, that's one of the most intriguing things about Tolkien, is that he is really good about dropping hints about things, the nameless things that live dark, deep in the earth, that, even Sauron doesn't know their names, kind of stuff. So it's really neat to be able to draw on that sort of stuff, especially when we're doing monster type things.
Well,
yeah.
So this not only inspired that one session with my players, but it actually, for me, inspired a whole race. And obviously, the creature from the old well was sort of akin to Ungoliant, right? I'm guessing, right? The kinds of creatures that really you can't destroy. You should just avoid them.
Right.
And so, being that Ungoliant was from a region in Aman called Avathar, I named this race of creature as we sort of continue through the trilogy, Avathari, the Avathari. And these described creatures that were obviously from before the world was created, who somehow settled here in the shadowy regions of Avathar. So I had to throw that out there that was, the concept, the idea that you just talked about, that, that these creatures who are so old that even the Valar don't know who they are, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of fun opportunities with them. That's the only hint I'll drop on that.
Okay, got it. So, did I drop too much of a hint? I hope not.
Oh, no,
Okay.
you're fine.
The other two were Raynar, the dragon.
Yeah, the Plunderer.
Yeah, from the Withered Heath. Now, was he based on a real something like a nugget that Tolkien threw out there?
Well, there is some stuff in the history about the dwarves and their interactions with dragons in the north that were definitely an inspiration. So, as far as is there, a single line of text that you can point to somewhere that has his name? No, not exactly, but there's definitely the concept is there. And of course, he's very fun to write for because he has quite an opinion of himself.
Well, yes, he's a great cold drake, isn't he? Is he?
Yes.
Okay. And the last thing that I really borrowed, and in fact, one of our characters is from there, is the Mountain Hall.
Right.
And we actually just a few episodes ago we spent Yule at Mountain Hall, and we had a whole celebration. There was a festival. There was a drinking contest, which I think was probably the best part of all three parts of this campaign.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was very fun. So, all right, well, let's go to the last thing then. When you and I had talked sort of offline, you asked me about something that's coming up called Mythmoot, which is coming up on June 27th, and you, being who you are keynoting on the 28th.
Yep, sure.
So please talk about that.
Yeah, so I got a chance to be a presenter for Mythmoot this year, and I'm doing a couple of different things. One is there's a keynote presentation where I'm going to talk about Middle Earth and Tolkien and role-playing games. And we're going to take a little bit of a historical look. It's not going to be just about Cubicle 7, but it's going to be about the whole history of it. Most folks these days are probably aware that the very first printings of the original D&D booklets had hobbits and balrogs and Ents in them, and that had to go away pretty quickly. But you could actually trace a line all the way back to 1970 and in a particular war game that was held at a particular convention to where did these things come from, why are they there, and why are they in the specific order that they are. So I'm going to go a little bit of a history dive there to talk about a little bit of the prehistory about how Middle Earth and role-playing games were tied together from the very, very get-go. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the different systems, Middle Earth role-playing, and then Decipher's Lord of the Rings game, which we didn't really mention in our history, but it was out there around the time the movies came out. And then, of course, Cubicle 7 has had a history with role-playing games in Middle Earth since 2011, so we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about that as well.
No, that's great. And I saw on the site, and for the listeners, they're still able to sign up for Mythmoot until June 6th, which I think is next week. well, it's next week for us. By the time this podcast comes out,
it
might be too late to register, but we'll see. signumuniversity.org/mythmoot is the website. And I was wondering if we'll be able to. There's some online streaming of some of the sessions.
So, Corey's talked about doing a virtual MythMoot, so you can sign up. And there is, I think, a little bit of a nominal cost for it, where you can sign up and basically virtually attend the keynotes and everything else. You basically, through Twitch, you'll be able to pick channels and say, okay, if you wanted to watch my presentation or whatever, it's going to be on Twitch on this particular channel from Signum University at this particular time. It'll be live streamed. And then, of course, I imagine VODs will be available at some point. So.
All right, well, that's exciting. I'm sorry I can't get down to Virginia this year, but I will play. Is it always in Virginia?
Yeah, I think. Well, of course, it could move around, but I think they're pretty happy with the facilities down there, the National Conference Center. Let me put one more thing in there too for that. Like I said, I was doing the keynote. I'm also doing a workshop, I think, on Saturday, where we're going to look at building dragons in the different role-playing systems, both in the One Ring and also in Mistress of Middle-earth, which is one of the things that the Lonely Mountain Region Guide introduced, is how to build your own dragon.
That is
so we're going to talk
awesome.
about that.
Oh, man. I'm going to have to come back to Adventures in Middle-earth, man. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. All right. Take care, buddy.
Later.
Though this marks the end of the episode, the road goes ever on. Until next time, join us at longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.